Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about Confucius, the ancient Chinese philosopher, and we're going to talk about his impact on education. So Confucius, he was born in 551 BCE and he died in 479 BCE. A bit of background about Confucius and his family life. Firstly, his name, Confucius. Confucius, this was the Latinized name for Kongshu. Kong was his family name and Zhu was the given name. He was also known as Confuzi, Fuzi meaning master. Confucius was born into an impoverished aristocratic family. His father was a low-level military officer, and Confucius was 3 years old when his father died, and it's said that Confucius did not know where his father was buried. Confucius married at the age of 19. He established his private school when he was about 30 years old in 522 BCE, and from this point he built his reputation. He gained access to the political arena. He became an advisor to the princes and nobility of the Kingdom of Lu and other neighboring states. His political agenda was to restore the Zhao rituals, which meant the political and religious system established by the Kingdom of Zhao, founder of the Western Zhao dynasty 500 years earlier. At 50 years old, he became an official in the Kingdom of Lu, and about 1 year later became the Minister of Justice. He organized a campaign to weaken the power of 3 aristocratic clans. However, the campaign failed, and he lost his political future in the Kingdom of Lu. He was then forced into exile in neighboring kingdoms for 14 years. Before one of his former students helped him resettle in Lu at the age of 60. The following 5 years before his death were the most prosperous for his private school. During his lifetime, the private school he established had 3,000 enrolled students, and he died in 479 BCE. Now, there's no evidence to suggest that Confucius wrote any of his work himself. However, historians agree that Confucius's philosophical and educational ideas were recorded in 4 books. The first book is the Analects of Confucius, the second is the Book of Mencius, the third is the Great Learning, and the fourth is the Doctrine of the Mean. In Chinese society prior to the 20th century, these 4 classics were among the textbooks for those who wanted to take the imperial examination. This examination selected officials for the imperial government. So among these books, the Analects, this is a book compiled by his disciples after his death. It's a collection of conversations with Confucius, which contains many of his most important sayings. Contemporary historians agree that the Analects is the most reliable for his remarks and activities. So therefore, his ideas on education will draw heavily from the Analects. So for Confucius, the psychological foundation of his educational thought is that human nature is neutral at birth. It's only by nature people are close to one another, and only through practice they drift far apart. So because of this neutrality of human nature at birth, the environment, including education, plays a very important role in raising young people. So what was education like at Confucius's private school? So Confucius, at his school, he provided educational opportunities to the elite as well as to the common people. He's quoted as saying, "I instruct regardless of kind. To anyone who came to me with a bundle of dried pork, I have never denied instruction." So the students who had conversations with Confucius, as reported in the Analects, came from various social backgrounds. However, Confucius regarded the educational purposes for the elite and the common people to be different. He said that if the gentleman inquires the way, he loves men. If the small man acquires the way, he is easy to command. The gentleman here represents children of the nobility, whereas the small man represents those of the common people. So Confucius regarded the purpose of education to be different for those who came from different social backgrounds. For Confucius, his notion of educational opportunity, it was primarily to maintain the status quo in society. However, some of his outstanding students did come from poor family backgrounds, and they went on to become important officials in the government. He said those who excel in office should learn, those who excel in learning should take office. So this notion of the scholar official was the primary justification for the later imperial examination. Confucius himself was heavily involved in teaching, and there are several texts about his ideas and practice relating to teaching methods and instructional content. Confucius paid attention to students' individual characteristics. In the Analects, it was reported that Confucius commented on his students' individual differences and suggested that they were suited for various kinds of jobs. In his own words, to people above average, one can impart higher things. To people below average, one cannot impart higher things. Confucius also expected his students to be motivated and active learners. In his words, no vexation, no enlightenment, no anxiety, no illumination. If I have brought up one corner and he does not return with the other three, I will not repeat. So the meaning of this quote is that Confucius was urging his students to take the initiative in learning. They should be eager in and dedicated to learning. If students were taught something, they were expected to draw relevant inferences from it. However, in terms of instructional content, Confucius tended to disregard practical knowledge. The following was recorded in the Analects. The master said, "Inspire yourself with poetry, establish yourself on the rituals, and perfect yourself with music." So Confucius used the so-called 5 classics, the Book of Odes, the Book of History, the Book of Rites, the Book of Changes, and the Spring and Autumn Annals as his primary instructional materials. One student came to Confucius who wanted to learn farming, but Confucius responded, "I am not as good as an old farmer." When this student wanted to learn vegetable gardening, Confucius replied, "I am not as good as an old vegetable gardener." So Confucius emphasized studying the classics rather than acquiring practical knowledge, and this then had a significant influence on the history of Chinese education. For imperial examinations, the test items were almost solely based on these classics. In addition to intellectual education, moral education also played an important role in Confucius's educational theory and practice. His students commented that Confucius instructed in 4 different aspects: culture, moral conduct, wholehearted sincerity, and truthfulness, with moral conduct, wholehearted sincerity, and truthfulness related to moral education. So according to Confucius's ethical theory, humanity was the supreme virtue, the total of all virtues, and it was manifested in many aspects of our lives. He emphasized the importance of humanity in daily life in the way one treats parents and others. He said that what you do not wish for yourself, do not impose on others. As well as the importance of humanity in daily life, Confucius stressed the importance of humanity in governance. He observed that if you yourself are correct, even without the issuing of orders, things will get done. If you yourself are incorrect, although orders are issued, they will not be obeyed. He also made a similar remark in another section in the Analects. He said, "If you can set yourself correct, what difficulty do you have in conducting state affairs? If you cannot set yourself correct, how can you correct others?" What then was the influence of Confucius on Chinese society? So this influence can be felt in China and also in other East and Southeast Asian nations. Although there have been ups and downs for the Confucian school and history. Scholars from the Confucian school enjoyed a high level of prestige in society and in the political arena. During some of the Chinese dynasties, only scholars from the Confucian school could advise political leaders. Many of the traditional values advocated by Confucius, such as filial piety, respect for the elderly, and moderation, still play an important role in Chinese people's lives. Also, Confucius and his followers, they emphasized education and learning, which can still be felt in China and other neighboring nations. As to Confucius's influence on education, the following are the most important. Firstly, the principle that those who excel in office should learn and those who excel in learning should take office has guided Chinese education. This principle and the notion of the scholar official became the justification for the imperial examination that selected officials based on individual merits, a system which was not abolished until 1905. So in order to prepare the most able and virtuous rulers, Confucius argued that education should be available to everyone, irrespective of their social class. So he was thus a pioneer in providing education to the common people. Secondly, the Confucian school produced a large body of literature which formed the primary instructional materials for many centuries until the imperial examination system was abolished in 1905. Although there's no evidence to suggest that the 4 books and the 5 classics were written by Confucius himself, these basic texts became the basis for the preparation for the imperial examinations in Chinese society. Because of this focus on the classics and disregarding practical and scientific knowledge, Confucius and his followers are often criticized for impeding China's progress in science and technology. And lastly, Confucius's purpose of education was focused more on social rather than individual development. The moral values he advocated for were related to governing and regulating social relationships. Confucius depicted a developmental path for his students, firstly to achieve self-cultivation, then family harmony, then good order in the state, and finally peace in the empire. Therefore, the real emphasis for Confucius for education was on the social rather than the private purpose of education. So this emphasis on the social dimension, it's related closely to the instrumental purpose of education, that is to use education as a vehicle to achieve a purpose rather than education purely for education's sake. So the training of talent loyal to the government was the fundamental principle of the official Confucian education. This question of purposes of education, the instrumentality of educational purposes, this is still one of the most serious issues in current Chinese education today. So thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. Please subscribe to Education Dojo on YouTube for more videos about education. Thank you.